My director ignored my warnings to cut costs, then called me unstable for caring too much about the company's money. 8 months later, and I came back as the auditor and opened the files that could ruin him beyond repair. I still remember the sound of the shredder. That mechanical whining noise. It's funny what sticks in your head when your life is falling apart. I was sitting in the tiny gray-walled HR office on the 14th floor, staring at a poster that said, "Excellence is an attitude," while the HR director, a woman named Sarah who had eaten lunch with me 2 days prior, explained why I was being escorted out of the building. "We've noticed a pattern of erratic behavior, Elena," she said. She didn't look at me. She was looking at a point on my forehead, like there was a smudge there. "Director Marcus feels that your fixation on routine vendor contracts has become disruptive to the department's workflow. He's concerned about your stress levels." He used the word combative. Combative. I was 27 years old. I wore cardigans from Target and apologized when people bumped into me in the elevator. I had $42,000 in student loans that felt like a physical weight sitting on my chest every morning when I woke up. I wasn't combative. I was terrified. "But the numbers," I whispered. My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to a child. "Sarah, the logistics contract with Apex." I showed him. "The unit prices are 40% above market rate. We're overpaying by nearly $200,000 a quarter. I just wanted to fix it." Sarah finally looked at me. Her eyes were tired. "Elena, this isn't about the numbers. It's about fit. And right now, you aren't a fit." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. "A severance agreement. 2 weeks' pay. In exchange for my silence and a promise not to sue. If you sign this, we won't contest your unemployment claim," she said softly. It was a threat. A polite, corporate threat wrapped in a smile. If I fought them, they'd bury me. Marcus was a director with a 20-year tenure, golf buddies on the board, and a reputation for being a visionary. I was a junior financial analyst who had been there for 11 months. I signed. My hand shook so badly the signature looked like a seismograph reading of an earthquake. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the sidewalk with a cardboard box. It was raining. I know that sounds like a movie cliché, but it was actually raining, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked through my canvas sneakers immediately. I had a potted succulent, a stapler I'd brought from home, and a picture frame with a photo of my dog, Buster. I stood there watching the revolving doors spin. People were walking in and out, laughing, checking their phones, going to meetings. The building looked so tall. It was glass and steel, gleaming in the gray light. I felt like an ant that had just been flicked off a picnic table. Marcus watched me go. I know he did. His office was on the corner of the 14th floor facing the street. I imagined him standing there, sipping his espresso. He had this expensive machine in his office that cost more than my car, straightening his tie and thinking, problem solved. I drove home in silence. No radio. Just the sound of the windshield wipers slapping back and forth. Slap, slap. Slap, slap. When I got to my apartment, I didn't cry. Not yet. I sat on my beige carpet, the one with the coffee stain near the radiator that I'd never been able to get out, and I opened my laptop. I pulled up my bank account.
Checking, $1,243.18. Savings, $400. Next student loan payment due, $680. Rent due in 12 days, $1,100. I did the math 3 times. It didn't change. I was broke. Segment 2 to 1,000 words. I had tried to be the good employee. That's what hurts the most when I look back at that girl. I was so naive. When I found the discrepancy in the Apex logistics contract, I didn't think, oh, someone is stealing. I thought, oh no, someone made a mistake. I better help them. I had spent 3 weekends analyzing the invoices. I built a spreadsheet that cross-referenced shipping weights with fuel surcharges. I was proud of it. I thought Marcus would be impressed. I thought this was my ticket to a promotion. I remember walking into his office that Tuesday morning. He was on the phone laughing about a tea time. He waved me in, pointing to the leather chair opposite his massive oak desk. "What have you got for me, Elle?" he'd asked, hanging up. He always called me Elle. I hated it. I laid out the spreadsheet. I walked him through the variances. "See here," I said, pointing to column G. "Apex is charging us for expedited air freight on shipments that, according to the warehouse logs, arrived via ground transport 3 days later. It's happening on 80% of the invoices, Marcus. It adds up to almost $800,000 a year in phantom charges." I looked up, expecting him to be shocked. Expecting him to grab the phone and call legal. Instead he was smiling. A tight, patient smile. The kind you give a toddler who just showed you a drawing of a horse that looks like a potato. "You've certainly been busy, Elle," he said. He didn't look at the data. He looked at me. "You know, Apex has been a partner of this firm for a decade. Their CEO, Greg, is a personal friend of the CFO. These shipping rates? They're negotiated at a level above your pay grade. Sometimes we pay a premium for reliability. But it's not a premium," I argued, feeling my face get hot. "It's billing for services not rendered. That's fraud, Marcus. Even if we like them, we can't pay for air freight we didn't get." His smile vanished. The air in the room changed instantly. It went cold. "Elena," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You're a bright girl. But you have a tendency to miss the forest for the trees. You're getting emotional about spreadsheets. It's concerning." "I'm not emotional," I said, confused. "I'm accurate. See?" He gestured at me like I was waving a knife. "That tone. You're spiraling. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? Go for a walk. Clear your head. We can talk about your role later." I left his office feeling like I was crazy. Maybe I was missing something? Maybe there was a master contract I hadn't seen? I spent the night doubting my own sanity. 2 days later, HR called me in. Now, sitting on my floor with my bank account blinking red on the screen, the reality hit me. I hadn't been fired for being incompetent. I hadn't been fired for being unstable. I had been fired because I was right. And Marcus knew it. I curled up on the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The shame was heavy, hot, and suffocating. I would have to tell my parents. My dad, who had co-signed my loans. My mom, who bragged to her church group that her daughter worked in corporate finance. I felt small. I felt stupid. And for the first time in my life, I felt a seed of something else planting itself in my gut. It wasn't sadness. It was rage. But rage doesn't pay the rent. The next 6 months were a blur of humiliation. I applied to everything. Senior analyst roles. Junior analyst roles. Bookkeeping gigs. Receptionist positions. The interviews always started well. I had the skills. I had the degree. But then came the question, "Can we contact your previous employer?" I couldn't say no. Saying no is a red flag. So I'd say yes, and I'd give them the HR number, hoping Sarah would just confirm dates of employment like she was supposed to. But Marcus had friends. Or maybe he had put a note in my file. I'd get the second interview scheduled, then a day later a polite email. "Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move in a different direction." After the 4th rejection, I called a temp agency. I needed to eat. I spent the winter working data entry for a medical supply warehouse. I sat in a basement with no windows, typing product codes into a legacy system from 1998. Click-clack. Click-clack. I was making $16 an hour. I stopped going out. I stopped answering my friends' texts. I told my parents I was consulting part-time while looking for the right fit. It was a lie, but I couldn't bear the pity in their voices. One night in February, my car broke down. The transmission. The mechanic quoted me $1,800. I stood in the auto shop lobby, smelling like old tires and coffee, and stared at the quote. I had $200. I sold my car to a scrapyard for $500 and took the bus home. That was the bottom. Sitting on the 42 bus, squeezed between a guy who smelled like onions and a teenager blasting music from his headphones, I realized Marcus hadn't just fired me. He had erased me. He had taken my career, my stability, and my future just to protect his kickback scheme. I looked out the window at the passing streetlights, blurring in the rain. I have no options, I thought. He won. But the universe has a weird sense of humor. In April, I got an email from a recruiter at Sterling and Associates. They were a mid-tier consulting firm, looking for contract auditors for busy season overflow. It wasn't glamorous. It was grunt work. But it paid $35 an hour. I interviewed with a woman named Jessica. She was sharp, no nonsense, wearing a blazer that looked like it cost more than my entire wardrobe. She didn't ask to talk to my previous director. He gave me an Excel test. I crushed it. I finished a 45-minute assessment in 18 minutes. Impressive, Jessica said, looking at my screen. Can you start Monday? Yes, I said. I wanted to cry. Yes, I can. I worked like a dog for 2 months. I was the first one in, the last one out. I double-checked everyone's work. I organized the shared drive. I made myself indispensable. In June, Jessica called me into her office. We have a new client, she said. Big manufacturing firm. Their internal audit department is overwhelmed, and the board wants an external review of their procurement processes before the fiscal year closes. It's a mess. I need someone who pays attention to detail. She slid a file across the desk. Client. Omnicorp Industries. My heart stopped. Omnicorp. My old company. Is there a problem? Jessica asked, seeing my face. I swallowed. My mouth tasted like copper. No, I lied. I actually worked there for a brief stint a year ago. Junior level. The interviews always started well. I had the skills. I had the degree. But then came the question, can we contact your previous employer? I couldn't say no. Saying no is a red flag. So I'd say yes and I'd give them the HR number, hoping Sarah would just confirm dates of employment like she was supposed to. But Marcus had friends. Or maybe he had put a note in my file. I'd get the second interview scheduled, then a day later a polite email. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move in a different direction. After the fourth rejection, I called a temp agency. I needed to eat. I spent the winter working data entry for a medical supply warehouse. I sat in a basement with no windows, typing product codes into a legacy system from 1998. Click-clack. Click-clack. I was making $16 an hour. I stopped going out. I stopped answering my friends' texts. I told my parents I was consulting part-time while looking for the right fit. It was a lie, but I couldn't bear the pity in their voices. One night in February, my car broke down. The transmission. The mechanic quoted me $1,800. I stood in the auto shop lobby, smelling like old tires and coffee, and stared at the quote. I had $200. I sold my car to a scrapyard for $500 and took the bus home. That was the bottom. Sitting on the 42 bus, squeezed between a guy who smelled like onions and a teenager blasting music from his headphones, I realized Marcus hadn't just fired me. He had erased me. He had taken my career, my stability, and my future just to protect his kickback scheme. I looked out the window at the passing streetlights, blurring in the rain. I have no options, I thought. He won. But the universe has a weird sense of humor. In April, I got an email from a recruiter at Sterling and Associates. They were a mid-tier consulting firm, looking for contract auditors for busy season overflow. It wasn't glamorous. It was grunt work. But it paid $35 an hour. I interviewed with a woman named Jessica. She was sharp, no nonsense, wearing a blazer that looked like it cost more than my entire wardrobe. She didn't ask to talk to my previous director. He gave me an Excel test. I crushed it. I finished a 45-minute assessment in 18 minutes. Impressive, Jessica said, looking at my screen. Can you start Monday? Yes, I said. I wanted to cry. Yes, I can. I worked like a dog for 2 months. I was the first one in, the last one out. I double-checked everyone's work. I organized the shared drive. I made myself indispensable. In June, Jessica called me into her office. We have a new client, she said. Big manufacturing firm. Their internal audit department is overwhelmed, and the board wants an external review of their procurement processes before the fiscal year closes. It's a mess. I need someone who pays attention to detail. She slid a file across the desk. Client. Omnicorp Industries. My heart stopped. Omnicorp. My old company. Is there a problem? Jessica asked, seeing my face. I swallowed. My mouth tasted like copper. No, I lied. I actually worked there for a brief stint a year ago. Junior level. Augusta for Q2. Standrews for Q3. And I knew one other thing. A secret I had never told anyone, not even when I was trying to save my job. Back when I was his assistant before I was an analyst, he had made me set up a rule in his Outlook. Any email from a specific domain, kensington-consulting.com, was to be automatically moved to a subfolder called personal/golf and marked as read. He thought I didn't pay attention. He thought I just clicked the buttons. But I remembered. I sat in that conference room listening to him blow smoke about fiscal responsibility, and I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You think I'm nobody, I thought. Good. The audit began. And I started to dig. Auditing is boring work to most people. It's looking for needles in haystacks. But when you know exactly which haystack to look in and exactly what the needle looks like, it's not work. It's hunting. For the first week I played it cool. I did the standard reviews. I checked the cafeteria budget. I audited the office supply orders. I let Marcus see me in the break room making tea, looking harmless. Settling in okay? He asked me once, stirring his espresso. Yes, thank you, I said. Your filing system is very robust. He chuckled. We try. Let me know if you need help finding anything. Some of the older files can be tricky. You have no idea, I thought. At night, when the office cleared out, the real work began. I waited until 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. The cleaning crew was vacuuming the far end of the hall. I logged into the shared drive using my auditor credentials. I had read-only access to the entire department server. I searched for the folder structure. It had changed slightly, but the logic was the same. I tried the golf courses. Pinehurst, Cypress Point, bingo. A hidden subdirectory under 2024 projections. I opened it. It was full of PDFs, invoices, but not just from Apex Logistics. There were others. Summit Tech Services, Redstone Supply, Kensington Consulting. My heart hammered against my ribs. Kensington. That was the email domain. I opened a Kensington invoice. It was for strategic leadership coaching and retention analysis. $15,000 a month. Approved by Marcus. I Googled Kensington Consulting. The website was a generic template. Stock photos of people shaking hands. No team page. No address except a P.O. box in Delaware. But I needed more than a P.O. box. I needed a link. I spent the next 3 days living on caffeine and adrenaline. I built a matrix on my personal laptop, never the work machine. I mapped every invoice from Kensington against Marcus's calendar. June 12th. Invoice approved for $15,000. June 14th. Marcus posts photos on Facebook from a new boat. August 3rd. Invoice approved for $22,000. Emergency consulting. August 5th. Marcus's wife posts about their daughter's tuition at a private equestrian school being paid in full. It was circumstantial. It wasn't proof. I needed to know who owned Kensington. I used a trick a friend in the temp agency had taught me. I called the number on the Kensington invoice, pretending to be a courier. Hi, I have a package for Kensington Consulting at the P.O. box, but it requires a signature. Do you have a physical address? The phone rang 4 times. Then a voicemail picked up. It wasn't a professional recording. It was a woman's voice, sounding irritated. You've reached the voicemail of 5550198. Leave a message. I knew that voice. I played it back. It wasn't Marcus's wife. It was deeper. Raspy. I closed my eyes and visualized the office parties I'd been forced to attend. The Christmas party 2 years ago. Marcus standing by the bar with a woman in a red dress. His sister. The one who worked in real estate? No. Property management. I searched public records for Marcus's relatives. Sister. Diana Reynolds. I ran a background check on Diana Reynolds. She was the registered agent for Kensington Consulting. Got you. But then the setback. I was in the break room, printing a copy of the corporate registry when the printer jammed. I was wrestling with the paper tray, ink staining my fingers when Jessica walked in. Elena, what are you doing? I jumped. I shoved the paper into my pocket. Just clearing a jam. Jessica looked at me. He was smart. Too smart. You look exhausted. And you're burning a lot of hours on the general and administrative ledger. We're supposed to be focusing on the Q4 supply chain. I found some irregularities, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Irregularities are normal, Jessica sighed. We're looking for material breaches. Don't go down a rabbit hole, Elena. We have a deadline. Stick to the scope. She walked out. I stood there shaking. If I pushed too hard and found nothing, Jessica would pull me off the project. I'd be fired again. I went back to my desk. I had to be smarter. I couldn't just show them the connection. I had to show them the money. I needed the bank records. External auditors don't usually get raw bank transaction data unless there's a specific request for a fraud investigation. I couldn't ask for it without tipping off Marcus. Then the wild card. It was a Thursday. I was eating a sad salad at my desk, scrolling through the vendor master file. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from LinkedIn. People looking at your profile. 1. I clicked it. Marcus Thorne viewed your profile. My blood went cold. He knew. Or he suspected. Maybe he finally recognized me. Maybe he saw me looking at him too long in the meeting. I looked up. Marcus's office door was closed. The blinds were drawn. 2 minutes later, I got an email from him. Subject: Audit Scope. To Jessica, Partner. Elena, Senior Analyst. Jessica, I'm concerned that your team is digging into historical data that is outside the purview of this fiscal year review. My staff is complaining about excessive document requests. Let's tighten the focus, shall we? We don't want to waste billable hours. He was trying to shut me down. He was scared. Jessica replied 5 minutes later. Understood. Elena, please sync with me. We'll adjust. I had maybe 24 hours before Jessica cut my access to the historical files. I needed the smoking gun. I went to the archives room. Physical files. The digital trail was getting too hot. I told the admin I needed to verify some tax codes from 2022. I spent 4 hours in that dusty windowless room. I went through box after box of AP vouchers. I found it stapled to the back of a misfiled invoice from Summit Tech. Marcus was sloppy. Or maybe just arrogant. He had used his corporate credit card to pay for a subscription to a cloud storage service. But the receipt wasn't for cloud storage. He'd accidentally attached the wrong receipt. It was a receipt for a storage unit. CitySafe Self-Storage Unit 404. The billing address on the receipt? Kensington Consulting. The card used? Omnicorp Corporate Amex. He was paying for the shell company's physical storage using the victim company's money. But the kicker? The date on the receipt was from 3 years ago, before the contract with Kensington even started. And then I saw the handwriting. On the bottom of the receipt, in Marcus's distinct jagged scrawl, was a note. Code: 1987, Elise birthday. Elise was his daughter. I took a picture of the receipt. I took the original. I walked out of the archive room. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I felt a strange, icy calm. I didn't go to Jessica. Not yet. She would want to follow protocol. She would want to ask Marcus for an explanation. But this time I wasn't warning anyone. I spent the entire weekend building the dossier. Exhibit A, the pattern of inflated Apex invoices, my original work. Exhibit B, the Kensington invoices approved by Marcus. Exhibit C, the corporate registry linking Kensington to his sister. Exhibit D, the storage unit receipt paid for by Omnicorp. Exhibit E, a timeline of his personal expenditures matching the invoice dates. I bound it in a plain black folder. No title. Just a label that said, Confidential, Director Review. I didn't sleep. I drank 4 pots of coffee. My apartment looked like a conspiracy theorist's den, with papers covering every inch of the floor. Monday morning was the board presentation. The findings of the audit. I put on my best suit. I put on lipstick, a deep red like war paint. I looked at the girl in the mirror. She wasn't the girl who cried on the beige carpet. She was the auditor. I drove to the office. I didn't listen to the radio. I listened to the silence. The boardroom was on the 40th floor. It smelled of expensive leather and fear. The entire executive team was there. The CEO, Mr. Henderson, a man who looked like a bulldog in a suit. The general counsel. And Jessica looking nervous. And Marcus. He sat at the right hand of the CFO, relaxed, joking with the VP of sales. When I walked in, he glanced at me and gave a tight, dismissive nod. He still thought I was just there to click the slides for Jessica. Jessica started the presentation. It was standard stuff. Efficiency ratings. Budget variances. Overall, Jessica said, Omnicorp is in a strong position, though we have identified some opportunities for tightening procurement workflows. Marcus nodded sagely. Excellent work, Jessica. We're always looking to lean out the process. Actually, I said. My voice cut through the room. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. The room went silent. Jessica looked at me, eyes wide. Elena. I stood up. I walked to the head of the table past Jessica. I didn't look at her. I looked at Mr. Henderson, the CEO. Actually, the process isn't the problem, I said. The problem is that the director of operations is stealing from you. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the projector fan. Marcus laughed. It was a loud, barking sound. Excuse me? Jessica, control your staff. This is the unstable behavior I warned HR about last year. I see she's managed to slip back in through a vendor. He looked at the CEO. Jim, this is the girl we let go for harassment. She's got a vendetta. Mr. Henderson frowned, looking from Marcus to me. Is this true? I was fired, I said, keeping my eyes on the CEO, because I found overbilling in the Apex contract. But I didn't have the full picture then. I do now. I opened my black folder. I took out a stack of copies and slid them down the long mahogany table. Slide. Page 1, I said. Kensington Consulting. A vendor paid $180,000 over the last 12 months for leadership coaching. No deliverables were ever filed. Marcus stood up. This is absurd. Kensington is a reputable. Page 2, I interrupted, my voice rising just a fraction. The corporate registry for Kensington. The owner is Diana Reynolds. Your sister. Marcus's face went from red to a sickly pale gray. He sat down slowly. Page 3, I continued, relentless. A receipt from CitySafe Storage paid for by your corporate card, billing to Kensington's address. And the kicker? Page 4. I clicked the remote. The projector screen changed. It was a spreadsheet. A simple one. Date of invoice versus date of deposit. I traced the routing numbers on the Kensington checks. I lied. I hadn't, but I knew the bluff would land because the rest was true. They deposit into an account at First National. The same bank where you hold your mortgage. The CEO picked up the paper. He put on his reading glasses. He read page 2. Then page 3. He looked up at Marcus. The look wasn't angry. It was disgusted. Diana, the CEO asked quietly. You're funneling money through Diana? It's a consulting arrangement, Marcus stammered. He was sweating now. Visibly. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. She advises me on. She's a property manager in frantic need of cash because her husband left her, I said. I had found that on Facebook too. And you're using the company to subsidize your family. Jessica was staring at me like I had grown a second head. But she wasn't stopping me. She was reading the file. This is actionable, Jessica whispered. This is embezzlement. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. This is an ambush. This girl is crazy. She's been stalking me. I'm an auditor, I corrected him. I document facts. And the fact is, Marcus, you ignored my warnings to cut costs. So I cut the biggest cost center in the department. I looked him dead in the eyes. You. The general counsel, a sharp woman named Linda who hadn't spoken yet, leaned forward. She tapped the file. Marcus, she said. Her voice was like ice. Give me your badge. And your phone. Linda, come on, Marcus pleaded. His charm was gone. He looked old. He looked small. It's a misunderstanding. I can explain. Badge, she repeated. No. Or I call the police. Marcus looked around the room. He looked for his golf buddies. He looked for his allies. But nobody would meet his eyes. They were all looking at the papers. They were distancing themselves from the blast radius. Trembling, Marcus unclipped his badge. He slid it across the table. Security, the CEO barked into the intercom. 2 minutes later, the same security guard who had watched me leave with my cardboard box walked in. Escort Mr. Thorne to his vehicle, the CEO said. He is not to return to his office. We will courier his personal effects. Marcus stood up. He looked at me. There was no arrogance left. Just shock. He looked like a man who had walked into a wall he didn't know was there. You, he whispered. Me, I said. He walked out. The door clicked shut. The room was silent again. I felt my knees start to shake. The adrenaline was crashing. I held on to the edge of the table. Mr. Henderson stood up. He walked over to where I was standing. He was a scary man usually, but he looked at me with something new. Respect. What was your name again? He asked. Elena, I said. Elena, he nodded. He looked at the file again. You did this in 3 weeks? Yes, sir. And you worked here before? Yes, sir. Junior analyst. He huffed. A short dry laugh. We made a mistake letting you go, Elena. A very expensive mistake. He turned to Jessica. Sterling and Associates has done excellent work here. But I think we need to discuss Elena's future. Directly. The fallout was swift and brutal. Marcus was formally terminated the next day. The legal team filed a civil suit to recover the $180,000, plus damages. Rumor had it they were referring the case to the district attorney for fraud charges. His reputation evaporated overnight. The golf buddies stopped calling. His LinkedIn profile disappeared. For me, the ending was quieter. 2 days after the meeting, Mr. Henderson called me into his office. He didn't offer me my old job back. He offered me the manager of internal audit position. We need someone who isn't afraid to upset the apple cart, he said. And frankly, we need someone to clean up Marcus's mess. You know where the bodies are buried. The salary was $115,000. Nearly triple what I had been making. Plus a signing bonus. I signed the offer letter with a steady hand. That Friday I logged into my student loan portal. I transferred the entire signing bonus. I watched the balance drop. It didn't hit 0 yet, but it wasn't a mountain anymore. It was a molehill. Called my parents. Dad, I said. You don't need to worry about the cosign anymore. Did you find a job? He asked, sounding hopeful but cautious. Yeah, Dad, I smiled at the phone. I got a promotion. I moved out of my apartment a month later. I didn't move into a penthouse or anything crazy. Just a nice 1-bedroom in a building with a doorman and huge windows. I painted the walls a soft, sunny yellow. No beige. On my first day as manager, I walked into the building. I swiped my badge. Beep. I got in the elevator and pressed 14. When the doors opened, I walked down the hall to the corner office. The one facing the street. It was empty now. The espresso machine was gone. I stood in the doorway looking out at the city. It was raining again, but from up here above the street the rain looked beautiful. It washed everything clean. Jessica from Sterling sent me a text that morning. Anyone who survives what you did doesn't need luck. You've already proved you're built for this. Good luck, boss. I sat down in the leather chair. It was big, but I adjusted the height. It fit perfectly. I wasn't the girl who got fired anymore. I wasn't the victim. I pulled a fresh legal pad out of the drawer. I uncapped my pen. There were other contracts to review. Other departments to check. I took a deep breath. The air in the office was cool and recycled, but to me it tasted like oxygen after drowning. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Audit day 1. I was ready to work.